Hello, my name's Adriana Johnson, and I'm from the University of Pittsburgh Department of Biomedical Informatics. And today I'll be talking about my work on a novel personalized random forest algorithm for clinical outcome prediction. So first I'll talk about predictive models for predicting patient outcomes and population machine learning methods that are often used to construct these predictive models. So given a large training data set of patients for whom we know a given outcome, we can apply population machine learning methods that perform feature selection and model fitting to construct a model that is optimized to predict well on average for future members from that population. And so here we see a population model that's a decision tree that partitions the training data set into groups of patients that have a similar type of outcome. And so again, this is optimized to predict well for, on average, for members of this population, but it doesn't guarantee optimal predictive performance for every member of the population. And certain patients who may differ from the average member of the population may not receive helpful predictions from a population model. And when our goal is precision medicine, we want to make sure that each and every patient is getting the best prediction possible when we're trying to use these predictive models to enhance patient care. An alternative approach is to use personalized machine learning methods. And so we take a training data set as we did before, but we start with information from the patient of interest for whom we want to make a prediction. And we use that information to perform personalized feature selection, model fitting, using personalized machine learning methods to produce a patient-specific model. In this case, we see a patient-specific decision path that is optimized to predict well for our patient of interest specifically. And so there are several approaches to constructing patient-specific models. Some involve personalizing the training data set itself, either by using information exclusively from the patient of interest or by using a patient similarity metric to identify patients in the training data that are similar to our patient of interest, and then performing standard population machine learning, model fitting, and feature selection to construct a predictive model. An alternative is to perform personalized model fitting, where the actual features selected and the model that's constructed is guided using information from the patient of interest. And so here we see a patient-specific decision path that's produced using personalized decision path methods, which are based on decision trees. But rather than constructing a population method that's optimized for the population on average, this performs an optimization for our patient of interest specifically. And so here I'll go through an example of how a personalized decision path can be constructed for a patient of interest. So here we have a patient who is admitted to the hospital with community-acquired pneumonia. And we know certain demographics about them, certain clinical features, as well as inflammatory and genomic markers for them. And we have a training data set of 1,115 patients for whom we also know this information, as well as whether they were alive or whether they had died after 90 days. And so our algorithm, the personalized decision path algorithm, evaluates each of the features present in the patient of interest, and then finding individuals from the training data set that share those features scores how well a model that incorporates that feature can predict our outcome of interest of 90-day mortality. So in this case, we would start with age. The algorithm would evaluate all the patients who have the same age group as our patient of interest, which corresponds to 617 patients from the training data set who were over 40 years old. And then the resulting personalized decision path using that feature for prediction is scored. And we see that 508 of these patients survived and 109 died. And we have a scoring metric that evaluates how well that feature predicts the outcome of interest. And so each feature is evaluated and the highest scoring feature is selected for inclusion in the model. And once all of the features have been examined, we found that this inflammatory marker was the highest scoring feature. The algorithm proceeds to attempt to add additional features and further narrow the subset of the training data population to see whether higher scoring models can be produced, and the algorithm terminates when no additional feature additions can improve the score. The final model we see for this patient of interest contains 3 features, 2 inflammatory markers and 1 genomic marker, and corresponds to 230 patients from the training data set, 217 of whom survived and 13 of whom died. So when we look at our patient of interest and we know their features, we can see how a population decision tree predicts the outcome of interest versus our personalized decision path. And so the population decision tree trained on the full training data set is very, very large, and we have just the subset of it that corresponds to our patient of interest. And the path consists of 6 features, and it corresponds to 2 patients from the overall training data set, one of whom survived and one of whom died. Meanwhile, the personalized decision path, as shown before, consists of 3 features and corresponds to 230 patients. And so when we use each of these models for prediction, our population decision tree predicts a 50% chance of 90-day mortality based on 2 subjects, and our personalized decision path predicts a 93% chance of 90-day mortality based on 230 subjects. And so because this was from our test data set that we used for evaluating the algorithm, we actually know the outcome for our patient of interest, and they survived after 90 days. So in this example, we see how a personalized decision path can construct a simpler model that is tailored to the patient of interest that may perform better prediction for the patient of interest, since we know that this patient was alive after 90 days. And so that was an example of a single personalized decision path. And we next wanted to investigate whether ensembles of decision paths could further improve predictive performance. So the first personalized decision path algorithm was called the lazy decision tree, and it was named that because it waited to construct a model until it encountered the patient of interest for whom a prediction wanted to be made. Whereas population methods don't necessarily wait until the patient of interest is encountered, they're eager and they train models before encountering a patient for whom a prediction will be made. And so we developed a method that we call the lazy random forest that performs bagging, where there are bootstrap data sets generated by randomly sampling with replacement from the original training data set. And then an individual personalized decision path model is trained on each of those bootstrap data sets where random features are considered for inclusion in the model during the training process. So that's how the random forest method traditionally works, by using randomized decision trees, and our method is new in that it used randomized decision paths trained on bootstrap data sets to predict for a patient of interest. And so now I'll go through the experimental methods that we used to evaluate our novel lazy random forest algorithm. We looked at several algorithms in terms of their predictive performance for predicting patient outcomes on a variety of data sets. We looked at a single decision path. We looked at bagged decision paths, and that involves training personalized decision paths on bootstrap data sets. And again, bootstraps are constructed by randomly selecting with replacement from the original training data set to produce a variety of training data sets that can then be used to train different personalized decision paths, the outcomes and predictions of which are then averaged to create an ensemble prediction for an individual patient of interest. We also looked at our novel method, the lazy random forest, which also trains individual decision paths on bootstrap data sets, but the decision paths are randomized in that they include random feature selection in the model training process. And then we also looked at a standard population random forest method, which involves training randomized decision trees on bootstrap data sets. The data sets we used for evaluation were real clinical data sets. So one was a chronic pancreatitis data set that incorporated genomic information for patients with and without chronic pancreatitis. We had 2 heart failure data sets predicting outcomes for patients with heart failure. We had a pneumonia data set predicting 90-day mortality for patients with community-acquired pneumonia. And we had 2 sepsis data sets for predicting clinical outcomes for patients with sepsis. And we had several metrics by which we measured predictive performance for our algorithms. The first was discrimination as measured by the receiver operating characteristic. The second metric was model complexity, which measured the mean path length, or the number of features required to make a prediction for a patient of interest. And here are the results from our experiments. So when we looked at the personalized methods, we have the single decision path, the DP, the bagged ensemble of decision paths, bagged DP, and the bagged ensemble of randomized decision paths, the lazy random forest, or lazy RF. And we saw that the mean AUROC of the lazy RF was 0.73, and that this was statistically significantly higher than either of the other personalized methods, the decision path and the bagged ensemble of decision paths. We found that compared to the population random forest method, which had a mean AUROC of 0.77, these AUROCs were not statistically significantly different. When we looked at model complexity, we found that the lazy random forest had a mean path length of 4.2 features, compared to the population random forest, which had a mean path length of 6.83 features. And so our lazy random forest had statistically significantly shorter mean path lengths than the population method, which we felt represented simpler and possibly easier to understand models. So in conclusion, personalized methods use known patient information to build patient-specific predictive models that are optimized to predict well for a patient of interest. We found that patient-specific ensembles can demonstrate better predictive performance than single personalized models. We also found that patient-specific ensembles can demonstrate comparable predictive performance to corresponding population ensembles with simpler models that are possibly easier to comprehend. Future directions of this work include assessment on more datasets and on larger, more heterogeneous datasets. I'd like to acknowledge my dissertation committee, as well as my friends and colleagues from my doctoral program that really helped me through graduating this summer. I want to thank my husband, my daughter, and my wonderful daycare that has allowed me to pursue this work, as well as the training grants and the MSTP training program that has allowed me to pursue my studies as an MD PhD student. Thank you so much, and please feel free to contact me if you have any questions.